Hi everyone, and welcome to another panel discussion. I'm joined today by Daryl, Kevin, Kerry, and Paul. And today's discussion point is going to be around the famous return to work. So a lot of us, obviously, over the last few months have been working from home, and that's thought way back around at that time we go back to work. Has actually started to hit us now, and many organisations are now starting to think about a return to work policy or process. So on that point, and given that it's something that will start to touch most employees in some way, shape or form, today's discussion is very much around whether it's acceptable for an employee to refuse to go back to the office if their management decides to reopen. A really interesting topic, I think, and I've had a number of conversations around this with many of my network and friends and family. But I'd love to put this out to the panel today to get their views on what they think. So maybe we can start with Kerry. From a HR perspective, Kerry, what's your view? Is it okay for an employee to refuse to go back into the office at this stage?
I've seen this question a few times posed, and usually it's the lawyers that answer it first. There's a lot of skirting around the issue, shall we say, because from a legal perspective, yes, you can ask an employer to go back to work, and there is a contract. You pay them, they go to work. But from a HR perspective, what I would say is, you need to talk to your employees, and you need to understand why it is that they have a concern about coming back to work. Is it because they are worried about the work environment? Is it because they're worried about their home environment or the travel to and from that work environment? Are you being reasonable as an employer? An employer has to follow a reasonable instruction, but are you being reasonable as an employer, and how you pose that question and ask them to come back to work? Explain to your employees what you're doing, what you've done to make the environment safe for them. Explain what you've put in place, and ask them what else you can do. What is their concern? What can you do to make it a place for them to come back to work and they feel comfortable doing that? So yes, I could get the big stick out and talk about disciplinary action and all those kinds of things, but that's not where we want to start. We don't want to be talking about sanctions or doing things to make someone come back to work. What we want to be talking about is encouraging them to come back to work, talking to them about what we can put in place to make them feel comfortable. And if they honestly have an issue around shielding, or they've got childcare issues, or there's something else going in their life, maybe you can allow them to stay on furlough for a bit longer, or maybe they can continue to work from home for a bit longer, or maybe some sort of flexible option where they come in sometimes and not others. So there are lots of ways that you can talk to employees and understand their concerns, communicate with them, and handle it in a sensitive and pragmatic way. Does that answer the question, Biraj?
Yeah, I think so. I think interesting point you mentioned there around communication being key. You'd like to think that organisations have been continuously talking with their employees over the last few months around their thought process and what they may be doing in the office space. And this shouldn't come as a surprise, hopefully, for organizations to basically say, right, we haven't spoken to you for 4 months, you're now coming back into the office. So hopefully that is the case. But as you referred to there, Kerry, that people have different circumstances. They're shielding elderly parents, relatives, or may have young children that they don't have childcare for. So I completely get where you're coming from. Paul, what's your view on this? Is it okay with all of those things that you may have, shielding, childcare, whatever it is it okay for an employee to refuse? I think the word here we're referring to is refuse. Is it okay to refuse to go back?
I struggle a little bit here, Biraj, with the comments that Kerry's made. So let's say it's a production employee.
Yeah.
And their job is on a manufacturing line. And then you've got someone in the same production building who's working in purchasing in an office.
Yeah.
Both same situation. One of their parents is elderly, one has cancer, they're high risk groups. both the same situation, they're going to be exposed to the same risks in the same plant. Why is it okay for the office worker to keep working from home and the production worker to have to go to the shop floor? Because we're saying they're a different value employee. We're saying, well, the office worker can do some work from home, the production worker can't, so the production worker should take more risk. Sorry, that was the job. I struggle a little bit there. If there's a decision that the office is safe to open up, and the decision of the company is that all employees will work from that office, and assuming there weren't a policy of remote working before, and it was okay for certain jobs to be remote, that's a little bit different. But if the job was hired to be in the office, the production floor, and the decision is the production floor is back open, I struggle to say, how can you allow someone to say no? It's going against the rule of command.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Darryl, what's your view on this? Because I think what Paul has referred to there is actually two quite different scenarios, in that one is able to work from home and has been doing so, and in most cases, from my perspective, been quite productive, right? The general gist that I get when I speak to organizations in my network is that a lot of organizations have been actually more productive in some cases, versus a production line worker who can't do their job from home, and therefore there's no way for them but to do their job then going into the office or environment that they work in. Well, what's your view on that, given that some organizations have actually been quite productive working from home?
Yeah, I think just in terms of that, the point now is, it's a great point in terms of having production line and then the office workers. Is there double standards going on? But I think if we look at what's gone on during the lockdown, particularly here in the UK, we've seen, the likes of Amazon, Tesco, Sainsbury's, all of the retailers providing the food and supplies. They've actually actively recruited. We've seen quite a number of people who have gone on to furlough, who have taken short-term contracts with the supermarkets, and that was before you had to wear a mask when you didn't have to wear a mask, and if you wear a mask you're wrong, or whatever the current ruling is on this kind of thing. People were going out there actually doing what they can to keep themselves active, to help the community and that was when I know we're not that much clear about how this will manifest itself and who's at the most risk, and we've got shielders coming back, etc. But there has been an example where those production lines have actually seen an increase in recruitment, and therefore these families have potentially been at risk before, and therefore, as Paul stated at the end there, if you are a company that you cannot provide that work from home, you have to really enforce that position. And then whether it becomes a case of, do you operate round the clock operation to split the shift to reduce the number of footfall that's within that factory, or whatever the situation is, to continue production but also provide the necessary, or as best as you can, safeguarding for your employees and then in turn their families. And I think the second point there, just moving on from that, is we've seen now, when we spoke, we've spoken about obviously, working in London and stuff like that. London's a very big hub, and we have people that travel from the Midlands, from the South Coast, from all over. We're seeing now in Leicester, etc., more restrictions being applied. Obviously in Aberdeen, they're now going into pretty much full lockdown, apart from essential trips to the supermarket or work. If that happens, we are then going to get a disparate situation where, if you're in lockdown, there will need to be a provision, if possible, that you work from home, but your colleagues would still need to go into the office. So I do think we will naturally, unnaturally, I don't know what way to phrase it, but we will find ourselves in a situation where there will be an inequality to what can actually be achieved in the workplace.
Do you think that could then lead to, and in a previous panel conversation we talked about diversity and inclusion. Do you think this is the start potentially of another divide of home workers versus office workers?
It could well be. I think, this will be certainly I think you'll have the honeymoon period where there'll be the level of understanding. But if a region it becomes locked down for another 3 months and you've got to get on a train to go and work, and they're sitting there messaging you can you go and get me something off the printer because I pressed the wrong print button or whatever, and read it out to me, it might get a little bit tiring, and you will start getting more kind of people fall off that understanding cliff, and then that becomes a little bit secretive and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It'll be a case by case, obviously, and hopefully these regional lockdowns will be for 3 or 4 weeks at a time. It makes it more manageable, but who knows? But yes, it could definitely turn into another another
divide
situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kevin, one of the questions I have for you actually is where you've got someone that is maybe refusing to go back into the office, yet are still having to go out to buy essential food items and things like that. What's your view on that? Like, is it okay for them to refuse to go back into the office, yet still be able to go out to the shops? What do you think?
It's a real tough one. I'm not sure if it's about right or wrong here, but from the legal perspective, a company can ask its employers to go back to work. Can they demand them to go back is to be seen. I don't know if it's been tested in court yet. So if I was advising a company, I'd be saying you need to be speaking and understanding the reasons why, as Kerry said, that you couldn't go back. To your point on whether they're going out to get food, everybody needs to eat. Like, it's just a basic human right. They have to go out and get food, and I don't think you can begrudge them that if their concerns are genuine. If it's a little bit of, well, I like working at home now, and I get that extra time to do my exercise in the morning. I wasn't able to go to the gym, but now, I can go for a run around the park, and it's beautiful weather out there. And also, I'm home by 4 o'clock, so I've got that extra bit of time in my garden to top up the tan. And no, I don't agree. But, to Kerry's point, where we're talking about, you've got to understand the reasons why. Everybody's individual. They all have their unique reasons, and I don't think it's an easy decision. That said, work is work. If you're getting paid, then there is an expectation. Now, if you can't do your job from home, then I think that's a different matter, and maybe it is you're allowed that additional furlough time. But we've got to understand the concerns as well. Is it because you feel the company isn't taking enough stances to protect your well-being? And the company, if that's the case, then tell the company, and the company needs to address that. But at some point, the company will need to make a decision, and the management will, is we need an employee doing this work. It can't be done from home. And with all the will in the world, we want you to be working here. But if you can't come in, then we have to fill that position with somebody who is going to do the work and able to do so. So yeah, I think it's a tough one.
Back on Paul here, because I know Paul obviously took a different view to myself. I just want to make it clear that we try as HR professionals to get people back to work, and part of that conversation is to find out what the reasons are. So if it's because they're a bit nervous and they like being at home and all the rest of it, that's not a reason not to come back to work. But if they raise a health and safety concern, or there's a discrimination element in there in terms of disability or something like that, then we have to take that very seriously. Health and safety trumps most things. And, if we're going to try and force someone to come back to work when something isn't safe for them to do so, and they decide they want to leave and take us a constructive dismissal, or they feel there's some unfair dismissal in some way because we make them come back to work when it's not fair, then there's other elements to that. So from my point of view, yes, we will try to do it softly and gently and get people back to work, but that gets ramped up depending on whether they're just trying to say, well, I like doing my yoga in the morning and taking the dog for a walk, and I don't actually want to come back, or whether there is something much more serious involved, which we need to take a little bit more seriously when it comes to dealing with the situation.
Yeah, definitely. I think Really good points from everyone there. It's a tough one, as you say, Kevin. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer specifically. I guess to summarize, from my perspective and from what everyone's saying here, fundamentally, I think it's very much about an open conversation, understanding why people are refusing. I think that the company has a responsibility to make the office space as safe as possible. But the one thing that the companies can't do is have control over the public transport system, for example. And if people have to travel on public transport to get to the office, it doesn't matter how safe your office is, but if getting to the office is going to be a problem that is out of your control, then you have to take that into consideration as well. That said, as Paul mentioned, there are some organizations, some industries that have no option but their staff to have to come back. And therefore, that's a different set of conversations that needs to be had. More than likely, those type of organizations probably wouldn't have had their staff in during the lockdown anyway. And it's kind of an all or nothing. Everyone has to go back or nobody comes back. Whereas I think where it starts to get tricky is where you've got that kind of hybrid model where some people may be happy to go back into the office and others are not. And where they're not, it's really about having that conversation to understand why and what mitigations can be put in place to be able to alleviate those concerns. So we're going to wrap that up at that point, I think. Thank you guys very much for your insight. Thank you everyone also for listening in to this. We'd love to get your views on what you think about this particular topic. So please do leave a comment, get involved in the conversations, and please do like and share this video as well so that we can get the conversation going wider. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.